This video is part of a webinar series on Hindudvesha, an educational series to explore and expose systemic Hindu phobia.
Now, I'm going to take a few minutes to draw some parallels with the Hindu situation. Uh, so, first of all, just to get everybody on the same page on the terminology, there are two terms that are concurrently in use today. One is Hindudvesha, the other is Hindu phobia. And I want to gently point out where they intersect and how they're different. So, first of all, Dvesha is a Sanskrit word, and phobia is a Greek word. And in a manner of speaking, coining the word Hindu Dvesha is an act of reclaiming the definition, and not using a foreign definition for that word. But also, there is a significant difference between their connotations. So, for example, Dvesha begins with dislike or hatred and moves towards repulsion and aversion. Phobia, on the other hand, begins with fear or horror but intersects with Dvesha when it comes to repulsion and aversion. So, in one sense, the two words, insofar as they denote repulsion or aversion towards the Hindus, uh, they share a common substratum. We come at it from different places. Um, you know, it's a good question to ask. Is the world really afraid of the Hindus? Uh, my answer is, doesn't look like it to me. In fact, the a lot of what is going on in Hindu Dvesha is predicated on the lack of any sort of concern or fear of consequence, simply because the Hindu community is very scattered, very fragmented. Even though it's large size-wise, it is not united at all, and it's not coming together in a coherent way to deal with this issue. So that's my first slide. Now, I'm going to trace for you the two sources of Hindu Dvesha. Two sources of Hindu Dvesha. So, the first is Christian theology. The second is enlightened modernity. And there is a connection between the two. I'm not going to draw that connection between the two today, but um, they seem to come at it from two different angles. So, within the Christian world, the Christian theology, Christianity is the true religion. It has received the word of God, which renders automatically all others as false religions or primitive religions, heathen religions, pagan religions that need to give way to Christianity, meaning they have to accept the word of God, the Christian word of God, and every last Hindu has to convert. And in fact, Hindus need to be saved or emancipated from Hinduism's own devilish, satanic beliefs. And towards this end, there's billions of dollars being poured into India to convert every last possible Hindu. And the economically vulnerable, the poorest regions of India are under relentless attack from a conversion standpoint. The money goes into India to build churches, to acquire land, property, and the conversion machine engine is fully underway in India. The other source of Hindu Dvesha is enlightened modernity. And here is a claim that modernity supersedes tradition. In fact, it must supersede tradition. In fact, the only way of knowing you're modern is that you repudiate tradition. Modernity has no content except that it is against tradition. Now, if you define what is modern, it's a kind of a moving target. What was modern 10 years ago is no longer modern. What is modern today will cease to be modern 10 years from now. So it's a kind of a moving target that continually sets itself apart from what it judges as tradition. And of course, the Enlightenment period gave us this reason supersedes revelation kind of construct, where now it is science which supersedes superstition. So, uh, in the in the construct of modernity, Hindus need to be saved or emancipated from Hinduism's own backwardness, primitivity, and traditions, which are all deemed automatically backward and primitive. So both of these come at Hinduism from two different angles. There are many more angles. These are only the two dominant ones. So the emergence of Hindudvesha can once again be mapped to the theology, the Christian Islamic theology, and the enlightened modernity. And interestingly, enlightened modernity is completely intertwined with the racial discourse. And these two, the religious and the racial, which Peggy pointed out earlier, they come together in a completely intertwined way to contribute to contemporary Hindu Dvesha. So here are a few examples of some quotations. Okay. A colonial era example, 1792, Charles Grant. He's saying Britain had an obligation to attend to the happiness, general welfare, and moral improvement of the people under its rule in India, and that the only way to do this was to accept that empire must legitimate itself through Christian principles, and by seeking to promote those principles through education and conversion, the communication of our light and knowledge to them would prove the best remedy for their disorders. Now, it's a remarkable statement, but and what it camouflages is the disorders, their disorders, meaning the disorders of the Hindu world, were in fact inflicted upon them by the British. And so they were both inflicting the disorder and saving us from that disorder, from our own disorders. So, to get clear about this, over a 200-year period, England extracted, literally plundered India to the tune of what is today estimated to be approximately 45 US trillion dollars in contemporary terms. That is a massive sum of money, and it went into the development of England. This is a clear Christian religious origin that Hindus must cease to be Hindus. Now here's another quotation from James Mill. Now, James Mill was not so much concerned with Christianity, but he represented modernity, enlightened modernity. He was a utilitarian. So here's a quotation from: In truth, the Hindu, like the eunuch, excels in the qualities of a slave, dissembling, treacherous, mendacious, to an excess which surpasses even the usual measure of uncultivated society. In the highest degree considerate of themselves, and full of affected contempt for others, in physical sense, disgustingly unclean in their persons and houses. So he wrote a book called The History of British India, published it in 1819, which became a textbook for all the young officers from England who were deputed to India to start in Haileybury College in England. It became textbooks in the newly created universities in India. And the civil service, the so-called civil service of India, was completely grounded in this text. And all they got from the text was utter contempt for the Hindus. Now, here is a completely different source of Hindu Dvesha, Germany. August Schlegel, writing in 1834, he begins his speculation, or he amplifies the speculation, that somehow, because the Sanskrit language and the German language are connected through for some historical reasons, he poses a question: Are the Hindus a pure race, or are they mixed? The purity of their blood, of which the ancient Hindus are so proud, has indeed been challenged. This thesis has been supported by the division into castes and by the servile condition of the last of the four, there are the Shudras. Such a degradation of the great mass of the people, it is said, it is said, that's a very Trumpian way of speaking, by the way, could only have been introduced following a conquest. Now, two things about this. He's questioning the purity of blood. He's making a case for the Aryan race as early as 1834. In fact, it began even before him. He's positing the theory that there was a great Aryan invasion into India. There was a racial invasion. And the contemporary Hindu is a product of the illegitimate mixing of a pure Aryan white race and an impure native non-Aryan race. Okay, so this is the crux of the whole racial animosity towards the Hindus. So this is Friedrich Max Miller, another German, a German who crosses over to England, gets situated in Oxford University, and he spends 50 years in Oxford. And here he's presenting a very enlightened view. The science of religion will for the first time assign to Christianity its right place among the religions of the world. It will show for the first time fully what was meant by the fullness of time. It will restore to the whole history of the world in its unconscious progress towards Christianity its true and sacred character. So what he's articulating is something which can be understood as fulfillment theology. The fullness of time. In the fullness of time, the Hindus will become Christian. They have to become Christian. It is their destiny, and Christianity will prevail. And we have to keep on striving until Christianity prevails. So the Hindu religion was great when it was Aryan, but it has degraded because it got mixed up with the natives. And now its salvation, its emancipation, its liberation will come only through the acceptance of Christianity. So this is pure religious, but now it's mixed up with the Enlightenment theories about race and about fulfillment and about modernity. And now you have the intertwining of both strands in Friedrich Max Miller. There's another quote from him: Hinduism is a decrepit religion and has not many years to live, but our impatience to see it annihilated cannot be pleaded as an excuse for employing violent and unfair means to hasten its downfall. The Christianity of our 19th century will hardly be the Christianity of India. The ancient religion of India is doomed, and if Christianity does not step in, whose fault will it be? He was a powerful, advocate for the replacement of Hinduism with Christianity in India, throughout his entire life. Hermann Oldenburg, another German, what has triumphed in India is a power we call Hinduism. Its gods are misshapen, wild, cruel, lascivious. Hindu gods are the head Shiva and Vishnu. Its books are the gigantic epic, the Mahabharata, and an unsurveyable host of literature, a transformation that affects the innermost core of the people, of the soul of the people, mixing with the dark colored aboriginals, transform the invaders, causes the Aryan to turn into the Hindu. This is the foundational theory that originated in Germany. Now we are at 1907, and you can see the cascade of this theoretical foundations that crashed into the era of Nazi Germany. Just 30 years from now, Germany went up in flames. So here's Erich Frauwallner, another German. Indeed, we find striking correspondence with thoughts and developments that are familiar to us from Europe. Correspondence where? In the literature of the Hindu world, in the philosophy of the Hindu world. This gives rise to an important question that has attracted too little attention so far, namely, the question of how these correspondences between Indian and European philosophy are to be explained. For once, the attempt must be made from out of a contemplation of the entire philosophical development of India to establish and isolate in broad outline the Aryan quotient in this development. And that was his research project, 1939, bang in the middle of the World War II, the Holocaust. This is an Indologist working in the Nazi regime. So all of this causes enormous ambient pressure towards the Hindus. So basically, the Hindus must be secularized, they must be westernized, they must be anglicized, they must be modernized, they must be proselytized, converted, Christianized, Islam. Something must happen. In the end, they must be supervised. If nothing else, finally silenced. And you know what? The Hindus have been silenced. There's no Hindu who speaks up adequately. The Hindus are ashamed, embarrassed, completely confused, constantly accused, on the defensive, totally denounced. And you see it happening on all sides. Jaiji will pick up the conversation from this point. I'll say thank you. Over to you, Jaiji.
Thank you, Kalanji. Shalom and namaste, everyone. Our guest speaker, Peggy, has very eloquently described the kind of hateful narrative the Jewish community has been enduring for many, many centuries. And of course, my colleague Kalyan Vishwanath has shown a parallel narrative that has been building up against the Hindu society on very similar, very parallel lines for the last 200 years or more. So here we have these two ancient cultures living in these two parallel universes under very similar kind of hateful, denigrating narrative for such a long period of time. Does it surprise anyone that our experiences parallel each other so well? Well, it doesn't surprise me, frankly, because when you realize that the source of this hateful narrative is actually, or sources are the same for both the communities, and their mission is the same as well. So, how do you classify hate? Hate is hate, but Peggy has actually classified it in 3 or 4 different buckets: the religious narrative, the racial narrative, the nationalistic narrative, and I've decided to add the socio-political, although she, I think, covered that in her presentation as well. And it goes from left to right, from the old times to the modern times. And what is happening is all these narratives are continuing on more or less in the same fashion, new strands being added to it as we go. And this is increasing both in loudness as well as in shill. Okay, so Kalyanji has covered the first 2 categories from the Hindu perspective, the religious and the racial. And I thought I would try to cover the other 2, the nationalistic narrative, and then the more contemporary, the socio-political one. Touching on the nationalistic aspect of it, both Jews and Hindus are uniquely identified with specific geographic areas, the land of Israel and the land beyond the Sindhu River. That is how our identities are defined. Interestingly, their histories might have diverged somewhat, but the hateful narrative against them has not diverged all that much. For the Jews, they were exiled from their ancestral land. They spread all over the world. And what happened? They were accused of having dual loyalties, as Peggy mentioned. When they regained part of that ancestral land, they are being told, you have no right to exist. Hindus, we have managed to hold on to our ancestral land, or at least a part of it, from the dawn of history. However, we have been ruled by the outsiders for the last 1,000 years. And the narrative that has been building up, especially in the last 200 years or plus, is Hindus have no special right to their land. To the land that they occupy, they have no special rights. Now, how did that transpire? To make something happen, to destroy a society, you have to create a false narrative. You have to corrupt their history. And how the history was corrupted? They brought in this abomination called the Aryan invasion theory. Built it out of thin air. It's been discredited thoroughly with modern evidence, but it continues on for those who want to use it to build the false narrative going forward. So it was like a Swiss Army knife. It had multiple angles to it, but Kalyanji has covered some parts of it. So let me just very quickly run through some of the key elements of this Aryan invasion theory. So it involves nomadic invaders from the West who happen to be relatives of the Europeans, the white race. They were far more advanced than the dark natives, and they were the progenitors, the source, the producers of the Vedic knowledge. And they are the ones who actually brought it to this land and imparted to the people who lived there. And finally, they pushed the dark-skinned natives to south of India. So this was nothing but an insidious attempt by the Europeans to impose the white race supremacy over the Hindu heritage. Now, you have met Schlegel in Kalyanji's presentation. I'll just very briefly touch on one of the statements he made, which impinges directly on the subject that I'm talking about. He says, and I quote, "The most ancient testimonies indicate to us Bactriana as the seat of a high civilization. My hypothesis is that the ancestors of the Persians and of the Hindus have thus migrated from there. Those of the European people migrated towards the west and the north." Now, why this hypothesis? Because they simply cannot believe that anything but the white race is capable of producing anything good, anything intelligent. What are the consequences of this? The consequences of this were, it normalized the idea that foreigners have been coming to India to civilize the crude and stupid natives. They devalued the native culture by definition, and they established the superiority of the white race. And most insidiously, they planted the seed of north-south divide in the Indian society. And finally, to the more relevant to the point I want to make is, they stripped Hindus of the exclusive claim to their native land. All, in India's, well, this land has always been subject to hordes of outsiders coming in. It's more like a train station. People come and people go. Fine, you happen to live there. That's fine. Enjoy the ride, but it's not exclusively yours. That is the narrative. How does that narrative then gets built? Here is Karl Marx, and I quote, "Indian society has no history at all. What we call its history is but the history of the successive intruders. The question, therefore, is not whether the English had a right to conquer India." So that is not even a question. In fact, England has had to fulfill a double mission in India: annihilation of the old society and laying the foundation of a modern Western society in India. Annihilation, destruction of the Indian society. Destroy before you choose to rebuild. Well, the British took it to heart. They certainly did the first part very well. They didn't pay much attention to the second part. Now, Max Muller, he says, "India is much riper for Christianity than Rome or Greece were ever at the time of St. Paul. The rotten tree has for some time had artificial spokes." So this now brings us to the modern times, and some of the narratives that you would hear in media, in social media, and so on and so forth, is India was never a nation until British made it one. India was formed by intermixing of so many races, so therefore Hindus have no special claim to India. And Hindus, because they don't have a special claim to India, they have no right to call it a Hindu nation. And Hindu nation is a threat to minorities. The irony dies 1,000 deaths when you look at the fact that, 18 Christian states that are declared theocratic Christian states, 23 Islamic states, 8 Buddhist states, and 0 Hindu state. Now let's move into the socio-political narrative very briefly. And it starts with trying to depict the Hindu society as bloodthirsty, violent culture. When you are trying to create a story through pictures, you don't actually have to have facts behind them, because all you can do is enactment and put it on the social media, and it becomes, after a while, becomes received wisdom. The other narrative, we are patriarchal. There's a hierarchy in the society, the caste system. They're filthy, and the society is problem-ridden. So very quickly reading through some of these messages, it says, smash Brahminical patriarchy, the caste system. Here is a reporter from I believe she was a reporter for NPR. And she writes on Twitter, if Indians give up Hinduism, they will also be solving most of their problems, what with all the piss drinking and dung worshipping. So we're filthy, we have filthy habits. And then this gentleman, he doesn't mince his words. He says, time from Brahmin Holocaust. And the last one. The Hindu society is being led by strident, boorish, and bigoted leaders. That's the messaging. So these are 2 posts on the left from Washington Post. One is about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Now, he's described as the austere religious scholar at the helm of Islamic State, dies at the age of 48. And on the right of the same card, you have a democratically elected leader of a state that actually, if it was a country, it's 5th in the seriatim of population. So over 200 million people live in that state. They democratically elected him, and he's being described, meet the militant monk spreading Islamophobia in India. And on the right comparison, we have a Time magazine reporting on Narendra Modi, the current Prime Minister of India, and then Erdogan, the President of Turkey. So if you look at, you don't actually have to, describe it in words, but if you just look at the way they're being portrayed, the intended message is Mr. Modi is threatening, strident, uncompromising, whereas the gentleman on the right is businesslike, but approachable. So that's where we are. One final slide, and then I will stop. Even our cultural and religious festivals are not spared. Here, Diwali is being described as the festival of facts. So Economic Times describes Diwali as the festival of facts, from diyas, the lamps, to deep fried delicacies. Diwali is a celebration of oil. And then Christmas, by the same paper, is being described, has delicacies that India loves, the sugary sweet Christmas, Kerala rum cake, Goa's babnika, and other delicacies India loves during Christmas. So here we are. I don't want to belabor the point, but I think some of the examples I've shared with you show some of the parallels that our Hindu experience has with that of Jewish experience. And I'm going to stop here, but before I do, let's remind ourselves that these are not just words on paper or in print or on social media. They have consequences.